My name is Ernest Baxter, and I'm a member of AJAZ. I became a member of AJAZ, I believe, I think 62, 63, I'm not sure what year. Becoming a member came about because of a friend of mine, Frank Adu. Frank Adu and I was working with the American Place Theater, which was Maxie Glanville's school. He taught acting and drummer, and I met Frank at AJAZ, and I met Frank at the American Place Theater, and he told me about AJAZ and what they were doing and what he was doing with them. Frank is an actor, and he needed other actors to do the bits and skits that we would do at shows for AJAZ. He asked me to come by AJAZ location or headquarters, and at that time they were located in the same building as the Apollo Theater, I think on the second or third floor. So I came there, I met Lambe Kwame, and I was, I think, totally impressed at what I saw and the dedication that, and what they were about to do and trying to do. I saw the photographs of the girls, the models. I saw many other photographs that Kwame had taken. And it was just a great environment. Talking to Lambe, I began to understand what his philosophy was, the kind of things he hoped to see change in the city, the country, the world. He was extremely inspiring, and we were young, we were young men then, and I had not met a young man with the kind of sense of commitment to what he thought could be and how to make it come about. So I was impressed, especially with Lambe, also with Kwame, his photography, and with Frank, who had bought into Lambe and Kwame idea. From my understanding, Frank and Lambe and Kwame, they were all from a section in the Bronx, a small little community, and they've known each other, I think, since they were young boys. I was different. I was, first of all, I was not from New York. I think I'd only been in New York City maybe 3 or 4 years before I met Frank. So it was a different experience for me. All this to me and what I was seeing and observing was kind of new, things that I hadn't really thought much about, we would. I was a part of AJAZ as an actor. The Grand Dance of Models would do shows around New York and also out of town. And along with the modeling, we would do bits and skits where we would perform scenes dedicated to knowledge and to what the difference between what was in the street, the process here, the drinking, the smoking. We do skits about culture and about cultural change. Yeah.
What?
I think AJAZ and the Grand Dance of Models has made a great impact on our culture, our sense of being, a sense of knowing who we are, and a sense of pride in blackness and just being ourselves, who we are. In the 60s, when we were doing it, I could see the change then, you know. In 3 years, I've seen change, and I've seen the culture begin to buy into the concept of black is beauty, and I think it's been a great change, 3 years.
You need to.
My name is Shirley McIntosh. I was a Grandassa model in the 60s. I was inspired to become a Grandassa model after an invitation from a very good friend of mine. And at that time, we both wore our hair natural. So it wasn't a big transition to start the modeling. However, I didn't know that there were models that wore their hair natural. And since that time, I have always worn my hair in some form or fashion natural.
How did your family and friends react to you becoming a Grandassa model?
Well,
Just say, my family and friends.
my family,
Okay.
I always wore my hair natural before I became a Grandassa model. So my family and friends were used to that, but they did not understand the modeling part of it. And along with the hair being natural, it was the clothes that we wore to model. And some were Afrocentric, some were traditional African, and some were European style. And that was something that people were not used to. So they did not say anything negative, they just found it interesting.
Okay.
My first experience being a Grandassa model, I was really very nervous because I had never modeled before. And the reaction to the audience was phenomenal. They gave us so many cheers and made me feel really pretty. And from then on, I just continued with the Grandassa models because it was a good feeling every time we did a show. Being a Grandassa model had a great impact on my life. It impacted my thoughts in terms of how I wanted to raise my daughters, the lifestyle that I wanted to live, and just connecting more with African culture. Therefore, anything that I do, anything that I did, I look for the African influence. The reunion with the Grandassa models has really made me see how important our contribution was. I never thought of it over the years because life, you know, you're raising children, you're married, you have jobs, and so therefore I never even thought about it until the reunion came about, and I started to reflect on how the times were then, how they are now, and I see the importance of it. And the reaction from people, even though it's been so many years, and I'm a senior now, but the reaction has been so positive that I would like to continue to promote the Black is Beautiful and to the reaction and the experience of the reunion of the Grandassa model has been so positive that I would like to continue to promote this idea of natural hair, being more Afrocentric, and to deal with the children and teach them what they need to know about their culture.
Five, four, three, two.
My name is Numsa Brass. I am one of the original Grandassa models. I became a Grandassa model when I decided to liberate my threads and stop straightening my hair. I met Ilambe Brass because he was a member of the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement, and they believed in black women not straightening their hair and being proud of who they were. Carlos Cooks was a Garveyite, and Ilambe was a Garveyite too. The first show we did was at a theater on 125th Street, somewhere on about 125th Street and Park Avenue. But the show was so well accepted, we had to do a second one. And doing shows at the Rockland Palace. I used to design and make a lot of the clothes for the girls. Because my mother was a seamstress and she showed me how to sew a long time ago. So I used to make a lot of the clothes for the girls as well as myself. I was a very good seamstress, and the girls loved my clothes. My mother did not understand. She had gone out of town, and while she was out of town, I washed my hair and stopped straightening it. So when she got out of the car, when I met her downstairs, and she got out of the cab, it was snowing, and my hair was natural. She said, "What did you do to your hair?" I said, "I stopped straightening it, and I'm gonna wear it like this now forever." So she had to accept that. And eventually she did. I married Ilambe in 1963. We had 6 kids. He had one daughter that he had before I had my son, Ilambe Jr. He did a lot of work for the community. And we were the people that helped the Central Park 5 to get them free from the charges they had against them. Ilambe was an African nationalist, always was, has always been an African nationalist. He even went to Cuba and met Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro even came to his funeral. Now he sent someone to his funeral. Ilambe was a community activist all of his life. He even used to have programs at the Harriet Tubman School on 27th Street and 7th Avenue. He had programs there every week where he invited people to come and speak to people in the audience. The Harriet Tubman School was always full, always full. I remember that was how we met Abby Lincoln and Max Roach. Abby Lincoln and Max Roach were the ones who always promoted the Black is Beautiful. Abby was a good friend of mine, and I love her dearly. And I miss her because she passed not that long ago. Well, being a model in the 60s gave me a sense that I was beautiful. And the impact that it had on me was that I was a beautiful black woman and that I could stand for my people. And my children loved me and my husband loved me. want people to remember that Ilambe was an African nationalist. He always believed in African people, and he loved his people. His parents were from Barbados, which is like straight across from Africa. His mother was Margaret Etelka Brathwaite, and his father was Cecil Theophilus Brathwaite Sr. He was named after his father, but he changed his name later on to Ilambe, which I think was a Lingala name, which means the liberator. I want people to know that Ilambe was a community activist, always was. And I want them to remember him as a community activist and a person who loved his people and believed in them. Well, African culture is very powerful. I remember in 1976 when I went to Ghana. I was there in Ghana, nobody knew who I was, I just looked like somebody else. They even spoke to me in their language. And when I didn't answer, they didn't say anything because they didn't know I was supposed to be an American. So I went to Africa and I was accepted by the African people. They just saw me as another African. And then I went on, I think another year, and I took my son Ramses with me to Africa. And we stayed in Accra, which is like one of the main cities in Africa. We stayed in Accra and ate the food, because they love okra. So the food was delicious. On our way to Ghana, we stopped in Nigeria overnight, but we didn't stay in Nigeria for long. But we stayed in Ghana for 7 days. And that was memorable. And my son Ramses still remembers that trip. I believe that the legacy of the Grandassa models was that black women are beautiful with their natural hair. They don't have to straighten their hair. They can just wear their natural hair and be beautiful. And still I see girls with their hair natural today. And wearing locks, because I had locks too. I had locks down to my waist. And I want African people, I want black children to remember that we are all African people. And we are beautiful, and we are powerful. And I hope they teach that to the children in schools too. Because the schools don't teach the black children who they are. But black children should know who they are and where they came from. Even if they came from the Caribbean or wherever they come from, they are still Africans. And they should never forget that. And their parents should teach them that too. And the Grandassa models leave a legacy of being beautiful women and strong women. And the Grandassa models leave a legacy of power in the black community, of always being strong and proud of who we are and what we are.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Barbara Solomon. That is my christened name. My African name is Ajwa from Proma. I started the Grandassa models, I guess, back in 1962. But before that, I did my hair in a natural to win a beauty contest. This was before the Grandassa models came into existence. This was in 1959. And it was Miss Naturally Standard of Beauty for a beauty contest. There were only 3 contestants. And the way you would be able to qualify for this beauty contest was that you had to have your hair in a natural. That means that you could not have a perm in it, you could not have it straightened, you could not wear a wig. You had to be who you were born to be at birth. And I won the contest. I was surprised, of course, that I won. And I was initially encouraged to become part of the contest or be in it by my boyfriend. His name at that time was Prince Henry Evans. I later wound up marrying Prince Evans. The beauty contest was a one-day thing. It was a one-shot deal. And after that, I went back to college and didn't think anything else about naturally or wearing my hair natural. Went back to straightening my hair. Of course, my boyfriend sort of kept encouraging me and telling me it would be better if you didn't straighten your hair. Well, I was on a college campus at Morgan State College, and everybody had their hair straight. You did not show up with nappy hair or kinky hair or frizzy hair. Your hair had to be done. In fact, it had to be a hairdo. I thought about it. I liked the idea, but I wasn't yet receptive to it. I guess I was still very young and very impressionable. So later on, after I graduated from college, the Miss Naturally Standard of Beauty turned into Grandessa Models. That was women modeling the natural hairstyle and Afrocentric clothing. Well, again, now my boyfriend was my husband, and he encouraged me to become part of the Grandessa Models. When I saw the first show, it was just beautiful, very striking. The women were just so, they were just glorious. They lit up the room. Their fros were not anything unattractive. They were extremely attractive. The shape of their heads, and they were just beautiful. And the clothing that they wore, Afrocentric clothing, the colors, everything just loomed and lit up and jumped out at you. And right away when I saw that, I said, oh, I'd like to model. I'd like to be a Grandessa model. So my boyfriend said, well, that's no problem. You can I'll just talk to Ilambe and you'll be all right. I'll just get you in, no problem. So he did that. I got in, and next thing I knew, I was modeling. Now, I never had a modeling class or anything. I never knew about modeling. So we had to learn how to walk, how to hold our bodies, how to pose for the camera. But the biggest thing was to have your hair natural. Now, you just couldn't show up at every shoot with your hair natural. You had to be natural, okay? It wasn't like, oh, today I'm modeling, so I gotta have my hair natural. Your hair had to be natural, period. Well, when that happened, family went ballistic, especially mama. Oh, your hair kinky? Now, when I was growing up, my mother was the one that straightened my hair every other week and burned the devil out of my little ears. I mean, it's one of my ears are the same color. That hot comb would hit those ears, and I'd be jumping out the chair, and I hated when she went to the back and started pulling the hair from the back, trying to straighten the hair in the back. And sure enough, when she straightened my hair and I went outside to play, and that moisture hit it, that hair went back just as fast as she straightened it. And I sort of remembered that and started thinking about being natural all the time and realizing that I would not be afraid of water getting on my head. I would not be afraid to swim. I would not be afraid to sweat because my hair would go back. I would not be afraid for anybody to touch my hair. And the idea of being natural started growing in me. And when I did the hair natural, of course my mother had a fit because I was going against the grain that she had taught me. And she was extremely upset. She thought that she could convince me to straighten my hair again, and she wanted to show me how horrible this thing was that I had done to myself. So I guess to gain sympathy, she went and took some sleeping pills. I don't know whether she wanted to sleep it out or what she wanted to do, but she wound up in the hospital. And the funny thing, when she wound up in the hospital, they wanted to know, of course, why did you take sleeping pills? She told the doctor that I took sleeping pills because my daughter straightened her hair. Well, the white doctor looked around, he rolled his eyes in the air, he said to himself, he tried to understand this. Straightening her hair made you take pills? He couldn't reconcile it. He didn't understand it such that he was ready to commit her because it didn't make sense to him. Well, my baby brother refused. He said, you ain't taking my mother out of here and putting her in no insane asylum. He said, Eventually, my mother came around. She accepted the idea, and in the end, she lived to be 95 years old. She died about 2 years ago. And her hair was natural, of course. I used to comb it for her and take care of her hair. And we would joke. She would say, if you die first, I'll make sure your hair is straight. And this is like, she's 95. We've gone over 50 years with our hair being natural. I'm gonna make sure that your hair is straightened when you lay in a coffin. I said, yeah, if I die first, I'm gonna make sure your hair is extra kinky in the coffin. And we would laugh and joke about it. But it just showed me how when you push yourself into a direction that you know is right, even though people around you are saying, no, it's not right. But when you in your heart know it's right, and God gives you the energy to do that, it changes the culture. It unsettles things that are already settled. It makes people think in a different way. It opens up a void that was shut. It opens up people's minds, and it adds to the diversity of what this country is supposed to be all about. It is a diverse country. Back in the 1960s, it wasn't so diverse. I mean, it was diverse in that there were other people here, okay, but the other people pretended that they were part of the main culture, the dominant culture. And the things that we did as black people was sort of undercover in our own neighborhoods. We had our own music, we had our own dance things and places that we went to enjoy, and it was quasi-segregated, and in the South it was Jim Crow, really segregated. But when you do things to change that, civil rights, wearing your hair natural, today we look around and we see so many women with their hair in natural, different types of styles. Not just the bush, what we called it back then, or the afro, what they called it, but actual, kinky, curly, wavy, locks, braids, all types of styles that they've come up with. And lately, I've seen some athletes on TV with their hair cut the way the Burundi, I think it's the Watusi, the Tutsi people. They would cut their hair in different shapes, okay, and different slopes. They would let it grow in a bush, and then they would design it and cut into it. It would be like scallop going in the back. And I've seen some of that coming through. And I'm just amazed that all this change came from opening up that little void that was locked so tight about Afro hair and wearing natural hair. Today, I swim, I dance, I love my hair in an Afro. I've even discovered a way to grow the hair at my age. So I'm growing a real bush up under this, you'll see. I have it, it's fluffy, it's thick, it's thickening up. I didn't expect to have thick hair at this age, but for some reason, God's given it to me, and I'm enjoying it. But I look at the culture, and I'm very, very pleased at what we did. I'm very, very pleased at the decision that I made, and the decision that my former husband, God rest his soul, he's dead now, pushed me into doing. I'm happy, I'm nappy, okay? I will always be happy and nappy. It is a beautiful word and it is a beautiful feeling. I come to this place, this Grandassa Models, modeling after all those years earlier, back in the 60s, and now 50 years later, being able to hook up with the same women that I was in the group with, it's a blessing. And to see that some of them are still Afrocentric. Some of them have still held their culture and continue on in that vein that we started back in the 1960s. I'm pleased. I've gone on to do other things since then. I've gone on to become, I've always danced, and I'm still dancing, God bless me. God bless my feet and my ability to do it. I dance, and I also have taken on becoming an author. I write books. I've written several books, and I elected to write books about ancient Africa. I have a series of Kamalas, I call it the Kamala series, and they're books about a little girl back in ancient Africa, the 12th century, West Africa, and what she has to go through, how she has to live. They're fictional books because nobody really knows anything that really happened back then, unless it's somehow noted in history. And my books are for children, they're children's books, and they're mainly to try and teach our children who we were, okay, back in those days, before colonialism came in, before Boko Haram, before Ebola, and all these negative things you hear about Africa now. It's to show you that Africa existed. It was a place where people lived and figured out their problems, lived together in unity, and I just had good lives and had healthy lives and healthy situations and associations with each other. So I want that to be my legacy, all right? I've so far written 5 or 6 books, getting to the point where I'm losing count. They are, 4 of them are the Kamala series, and the other 2 are about animals and eagle, the eagle that would not fly and the frog that could not jump. Again, children's books to make them think of who they are and what they can do. We are born and we don't know what we are and what we can do. So many of us get laid on the pile, the waste pile, I call it, the drug pile, which is a waste pile, the prison pile, which is another pile of waste, all right, that we don't know who we are. We are the people that built those pyramids. We are the people that gave culture and civilization to the world. And why we think we can't do that again, I have no idea. But certainly, if we built 5 kingdoms, okay, in Africa, we can certainly do better than what we are doing today, okay? We can certainly be more than what we are today. We can certainly be the true African American people that we are. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Black Rose, and I am an original Grandessa model. It was a very wonderful experience being involved with this group of conscious brothers and sisters, along with AJazz, who founded the Grandessa Models. And AJazz was composed of Ilambe Brath and Kwame Brathwaite, Robert Gums, and Ernest Baxter, and David Ward, and some other brothers who were very instrumental in us coming together and showing our culture. And the Grandessa Models was a wonderful experience for me because it gave me an opportunity to show pride in myself and my culture, and as a Black woman, to show my African beauty, along with other sisters that had that consciousness as well, too. Because at that time, it was very unique. No one else was projecting their African beauty. And it was very alarming to our community because they had the European look and were satisfied with it. Even the beauty business was didn't feel good about it at all because they were losing money because so many of us had converted to our African beauty, and the community in general did the same because I was doing their hair. I was the first person that originated the specialization of the diversity of African hairstyling. And the Grandessa models was all in sync with all of that. And so it was just a wonderful time, even although the challenges were very great, because a lot of people, they didn't accept it. They would say, oh, what happened to your hair? Why don't you do your hair? What are you trying to prove? You know? And it's about being who we are and being proud of who we are. And that's what we advocated.
You didn't talk about how you met, how were you approached?
Yeah, so I remember vividly the first show that we had, the Grandessa models, and we weren't sure what kind of turnout we were going to have, how our community would respond. But it was overwhelming the way our community did respond. In fact, we had a sold-out crowd the first show, and we had to do a second show because we couldn't turn them away. And it was packed, and from then on it just was like a rolling stone. And it was just magnificent. And we had many notables, Abby Lincoln, Aminata Mosega, and Max Roach, Gustin Zulu and his group danced at most of our shows, and many celebrities. A brother named Matiwana Manana from South Africa, a Zulu brother. He also gave us names, some of us Zulu names. He gave me the name Sabongele, and he gave the other models also, the other Grandessas, Zulu names as well, and we still use them today. It was just so wonderful being a part of us showing our African beauty, our ancestral beauty, and being proud of who we are. And it took like wildfire. So many, my business flourished. I had a shop on Lenox Avenue, and people used to wait for hours to get their hair done. And because whenever you start something unique or something different, and no one else is doing it, then everybody, and it catches on, everybody comes in that direction. And it was just phenomenal. And there was a brother that also started doing it at that time. I had to send a lot of people to him because I couldn't just do everybody. So it was enough room, it was enough for all of us to participate in serving our people. And the Grandessa models, we had wonderful shows. We went on tour. We went to Detroit and Chicago, and that was wonderful. We also did fashion shows, African fashion shows and hair shows in some leading department stores. Like Stearns was one, and it was just so overwhelming in our community.
Roll.
Yes, this was during the 60s, and it was a time when everybody was beginning to wear their hair natural. I was so fortunate to service people like Angela Davis. She used to live across the street from Esplanade Gardens when she came to New York, and I had a shop, Black Rose African Beauty Center, across the street from Esplanade Gardens. And she would come and get her hair done, and we had a very wonderful time, a wonderful rapport with each other, speaking about our African beauty and how our culture was being recognized at last, and people were wearing their hair natural and feeling proud about it, their African beauty, because that's what we advocated, racial pride and and our African ancestral beauty. Also, I did Cicely Tyson's hair for Roots as well. And she has a very unique hairstyle that I gave her. And it was, I was inspired by a Sudanese style that I saw in National Geographic. And this style, it was, the head was shaved bald, except for polka dots all over the head. So I reversed the concept and cut the hair down close and cut lines into the hair. And so it looked like I called it African patterns. And it looked almost like a pie that was sliced horizontal and vertical. It's a beautiful style. I did give that style to about 6 or 7 people after that. Also some notables. A professor at a city college, Sophia Bendelli, and some other sisters in our community. I had another shop on Lenox Avenue as well, and that was very close to Harlem Hospital, 2 blocks away from Harlem Hospital. Now it's called Malcolm X Boulevard, so let me give due respect to the change of the name. It's now called Malcolm X Boulevard, as many of us know. And there, I had a lot of business as well. Our community, in fact, it flourished so much wearing our natural hair during that time. And today, it's been almost in reverse, you know. And we are coming back together 57 years later. We had a reunion September 22nd at the Dwyer Center, and it was packed, full house. And we are still going to surface again and perpetuate our ancestral beauty, because we need to show pride in who we are.
Closing comments. Quick, I'm sorry.
The reunion that we had after 57 years, which is a long time, we came together again because there's a need for us to perpetuate our culture and our African beauty again, because it has phased out from what we did in the 60s up until this time. It has been down to a minimum. So now we have to surface again and show everyone, because we call ourselves the Black is Beautiful movement. And we have to realize Black is beautiful. It will always be beautiful. It has always been beautiful. So we're back again, and we're going to also, we want to show our future generations the way to go, the way to project themselves, to be proud of who they are.
And then now, headshot with the beautiful headpiece there, or crown. Queen Black's crown.
Okay, well, my name is Nana Okonkwo Penyin Bakain, Okugram Ponyirenchiwa. I am an Akan priestess in the tradition as a priestess over 30 years, but I've been in the tradition since 1972. I was introduced, or I met Baba Ilambe Brath in, I think, around 1972, and we were working with the African Liberation Support Committee. So I came in as a teenager, and
everything just came together. We were working on all the struggles that were going on, particularly in Africa, all the revolutionary movements that were taking place in Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, all the places that were very active at that time. And so the African Liberation Support Committee was a very strong organization and movement that was fighting for the liberation of African people. And so that was the start of my relationship with Ilambe Brath. I grew up in Harlem, and I'm the oldest of 7 children. And growing up in Harlem, it was a place where at that time, everything great was going on. People talk about Brooklyn now, but Harlem, it was wonderful. I lived like a block away from the mosque, Temple number 7. We used to have block parties, and my parents even told me about when they met Malcolm X and how he gave them some inspiring words as a family. And just being in that environment, Olatunji, he had his dance studio uptown. James Brown used to come out and perform for people. There was so much going on in Harlem, and it all I just was part of that whole experience. My parents, well, my mom, her parents were Garveyites, and my grandfather used to always tell me about the things that were going on then. He would share stories because he came from the South. He was a sharecropper, and he left the South for his own safety because he was a fighter. And they didn't want to pay him, you know, for the work he was doing. And so my grandmother, she got a warning that he should leave there because they were most likely going to do away with him. So he didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay and fight, but they begged him, and that's how he came up to the north. And my father's parents also were from the South. And I lived with them just for a little while, but I did experience the segregation that was going on there, the poverty, and all of these things impacted on my life. And so growing up, we grew up in a very conscious household. And we got African names at a young age. Ilambe, Baba Ilambe gave me the name Zamye. And he said that this is a name for a girl who is returning home. And so I gave my brothers and sisters all African names too. And we just had such a bond. And Mama Numsa and the whole family, the children, you know, my brothers, my younger brothers also became friends with them. The whole family, we just came together, and it was a teaching experience. So I eventually became involved in Patrice Lumumba Coalition, and again, we were doing a lot of political activism then and there, but the studio, it was the same studio. So I started modeling, taking various pictures that would represent, you know, our African beauty, different poses, and I had my hair natural then and now still. And that was an experience that was very wonderful. My family had also taken pictures for a certain publishing company that published books for schools. And so our family was one of the few black families that actually were in some of those textbooks. But that was a whole different experience from becoming a Grandassa model. So what we did
during the time that I was in the Grandassa Models, which was roughly around 1973 until about 77 or so. We used to perform a lot of political commentary, poetry, and writings, either writings from or about great leaders like Sekou Touré and beloved Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah. We would recite their words. We had to memorize everything. So we would recite their words and their messages, Amilcar Cabral, various messages or speeches that they gave. Bobby Lambe would break it down for us to memorize those things. And then we would dress in African attire, or if it was a presentation about something revolutionary, we would also dress in revolutionary attire. And we would do our thing. We would share the words and do some various poses and performances, and it was great. It was wonderful. I met amazing people. There was one show or program we did upstate at Cornell University where Joe Mensah, the late great Joe Mensah, who had a band, he was from Ghana. Joe Mensah and his band performed with us. Bobby Shangi, the late Bobby Shangi, and his family performed with us. And we went up to this university to do a major production. And at that time, I learned something very special about culture. What happened was the brother who had arranged for us to do the program, he was a farmer. He was studying organic farming. And when he welcomed us there, he said that he had organic turkeys and that they prepared a beautiful spread for us. So the turkey was there and he had other foods. Well, Bobby Shangi's family were vegetarians, so they could not eat the turkey. But one of the band members, one of Joe Mensah's band members, he said he couldn't eat fowl or bird. He said, but if you have turtle, he could eat that. And Ilambe, you know, he shared that story with us, and it was so funny, but it was very insightful because it taught a lesson about who we are as African people, and that we are vast. We are vast in our knowledge, vast in our culture and our traditions, vast in our experience and our relationships with one another. So I learned many things being a Grandassa model. My family, they were very supportive and encouraging, and it inspired my brothers and sisters as well. And it's something that I will never forget. It impacted and changed my life because it raised me up a notch to understand the importance of, what would you call it? Well, we say culture. The culture is people's ways of life, but also culture in the sense of, well, entertainment or artistic expression. How important that artistic expression is in how it can impact on people, how it can teach people, and how it can inspire people. Well, the impact of this 57 or 50 plus anniversary of the Grandassa Models is very, very important because it shows that we're still here, that we still have a purpose. Our purpose to inspire our African women, whether they're here in the diaspora or even in Africa, that our African beauty and our African pride is something that we must embrace, that we must revitalize. I see a lot of young women now wearing their hair natural, and children wearing their hair natural, but what I'm not seeing is the actual hands-on creativity with the styles. I know people, wear extensions and all that, and all that's part of our African tradition too, but we as the elders of this movement are able to bring us all together and let our young women and girls know that it's an ongoing process. Pride and respect in ourselves, love of our identity, our skin, our hair, and everything about us that is something to love and to embrace. Not to be ashamed, to be proud of it, pass it on to the next generation, and I believe that's what we're doing now. It's bringing the history up to the present. And that's very important because history, it has to keep going, it has to come together. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to inspire our young people, inspire our young women and our young men, and bring all of the generations together so that we can keep it going.
Hello, my name is Bob Gums. I am one of the original members of AJAZZ, the African Jazz Art Society and Studios, which was founded in 1956 by a group of young artists, photographers, and jazz fans in the South Bronx. We began producing jazz concerts at that time because where we lived, there were no jazz clubs. And we had to go downtown to see the jazz artists. So it was decided among the original members, Lambe Brath, Kwame Brathwaite, Chris Asmendisi Hall, and a few other jazz fans, that we would become producers of jazz concerts. So we produced at a club called the 845 in the Morris section of the South Bronx, which was known as a historic jazz club in the middle to late 1940s, featuring some of the top jazz artists at that time. We approached the owner with the idea, and he said, great, you could have the club on Sunday. So we started producing a series of Sunday afternoon jazz concerts. And we were able to get the support of some of the top jazz artists at that time. Horace Silver, Donald Byrd, singers like Betty Carter. So we became known as the producers of jazz concerts in the South Bronx. That went from 1957 to 1959. Then we were meeting at the home of Lambe Brath. And we decided it was time to move out of his basement. And we started looking for an office. We were very fortunate to find space right next door to the Apollo Theater. So we started going down to Harlem, and around 1960, we started hearing the street speakers at that time talking about African nationalism. And we were very impressed. One of the main speakers was a man by the name of Carlos Cooks. He was the president of the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement. And we were really impressed with what he was saying about African culture, African history, and Marcus Garvey. So we began to attend some of their events that they would hold at several places in Harlem. One place was the Renaissance Ballroom. Every August 17th, they would have what they call a Miss Natural Standard of Beauty contest. And the idea was based on the Garvey principle and philosophy of Black is Beautiful. They would have an annual hair and fashion show, and to really encourage women to stop putting chemicals in their hair. After one of the shows, Alambe came up with the idea of why don't we form an organization called the African Jazz Art Society and Studios and produce a series of hair and fashion shows. We called the models, and the idea was to feature Black women wearing their hair natural, just like this particular fashion show. The name of the models was called the Grandassa models, and that was a term that Mr. Cooks used to refer to Africa to. That was the identity that he gave it. So we took that name and we started producing a series of what we call the Naturally shows in 1962. The first show was at a club called the Purple Manor, and it was something that none of us was really prepared for because it was a new idea. Here we were showing women with their hair in its natural state. Now at that time, Black women, most of them were chemically straightening their hair. And so it was an idea that we didn't know how people would respond to it. So we said, hey, let's give it a try. And we had the first show. And to our surprise, there were lines almost around the block. So we said, wow, we've got a successful event here. So from there, we were able also to get the attention of Abbey Lincoln, who at that time was the only prominent Black singer who was wearing her hair in its natural state. She agreed to be part of the series, and along with her husband, who at that time she was married to Max Roach, the famous jazz drummer. So we had their support, and the shows began to take off. We traveled to a number of cities in 1963. We traveled to Chicago and Detroit. We also did shows at certain colleges and universities in the New York City area. But the whole idea was to promote Black is Beautiful. And the naturally hairstyle became the fashion statement of the period. Anyone who's aware of the 60s, you'll see both men and women wearing their hair in its natural state. So the shows really, culturally speaking, raised the consciousness of Black men and women to the beauty, not just of their hairstyles, but who they were as people. Also, let me just go back and say that the whole idea of the Natural series was to feature Black women, not just wearing their hair in its natural state, but showcasing women of different complexions. Because most of the fashion shows at that time showcased Black women who were primarily fair-skinned and with their hair straightened. So we were coming out with a whole new concept. And our shows really began to become fashion statements for that period. Shows influenced a number of shows, not just in the United States, but around the country. We were able to produce those shows for almost 30 years. And when I think today of the influence that we had. And here again, when we started out, we just wanted to showcase the beauty of black women. But those shows had such an influence that I see today in many women across the country and even other parts of the world, those standards being replicated. So you never know what you get yourself into.
No, it just
AJazz, the African Jazz Art Society, was made up of a group of artists and photographers. My background is in graphic design. I went to art school along with Kwame and Ilambe. In fact, that was a specialized school at the time. We were several years apart. Ilambe Brath was an excellent cartoonist and writer. And his brother Kwame was a photographer. And Chris Asamandisi Hall was also one of the founding members, was also a cartoonist and a songwriter. The commonality that we had was we all attended art school, but we had this interest in music, and that's what really brought us all together. And from there, we, identified with African nationalism and Garveyism, and we tried to use our art skills to promote that ideology and philosophy. Ilambe went on to become a noted speaker, radio host. Kwame Brathwaite, who was one of the principal photographers of AJazz, he documented many of the shows, and it is really great to see his work today exhibited around the country in different forms and featured in different photo shows. But that was his specialty, of really capturing what we were doing, as well as really showcasing their own talents and skills. And what that made us realize was the power of the arts. How a group of young men at that time could pool their talents and skills and make a contribution, certainly to people of African descent, in raising their consciousness to who they were and what they could be. And I think, certainly I feel we were very successful in doing that. Other members of the African Jazz Art Society, we were actually producing, as we think back, at least I do, I think back, we were just doing more than just fashion shows. They were really productions. And we brought in a number of young actors at the time. Several I grew up with, Frank Adu Robinson and David K. Ward. They were studying theater with a noted actor at the time who had a teaching class called Max. His name was Max Glanville. And through their talents, we put together a series of skits showcasing African culture. So it was their opportunity really to sharpen their skills and at the same time communicate the message of what the shows were about. Simply not just women walking down a runway, but what we tried to do is bring a whole show to people. And those were the skills that people like a Frank Adu or David Wood or an Ernest Baxter, sorry, I forgot him. Ernest was also part of that group of young acting talent at that time. And we were able to incorporate their talents and into the shows, and they really added another dimension to the whole Naturally show productions. When we were producing the fashion shows, the Naturally shows as the series was called, we recognized that we were pioneers in showcasing Black women as they naturally are, in their beautiful state, which many of them were not really aware of, because we were living in a society that really didn't feature them. Here again, I think through the shows, we were able to showcase the beauty of Black women as they naturally are. And what it did, and it began to be reflective in the mass media. For example, you saw magazines, magazine ads featuring women with their hair natural. There were stars, up-and-coming actors and actresses that really took on that identity because people began to realize how beautiful they were. And one of the main features of the shows that we tried to emphasize was that whole Garvey concept of blackness. Blackness is not negative. Black is beautiful. And so to instill a sense of pride and dignity in Black people. And I think we were very successful, and I look around today and I see the success that we were fortunately able to embed in certainly Black culture through various contemporary shows. Certainly, and it also spilled over into the broader fashion world, whereas today, with back then, you saw very few dark-skinned Black women. Today, it is not uncommon in many of the major fashion shows to see a representation of different types of Black women. And I think, that had a tremendous influence, not just within the Black community, but the broader fashion world. And we certainly, as I said, see that today. In fact, one of the influences that we can certainly see is that in Richmond, Virginia, every year there's an annual show called Happily Naturally. And it showcases the beauty of Black women for a full day in their natural state. So here again, I think we were successful in planting the seeds for not just generations that were coming up at that time, but certainly generations for the future. Because when you instill a sense of beauty and pride in people, it elevates them to higher standards within themselves that they may not be aware of.